A warm welcome to everybody to the pre-tender meeting for contract 4021, construction of the Port Hardy Transfer Tunnel, forming part of phase 2 of the Lesotho Highlands water project. The presenters today, John Sawyer, Deputy Executive Manager, Project Management Unit, myself, Jonathan Parry, Project Manager, MSKC, and Michael Kastner, Chief Design Engineer, MSKC. The presentation today should take in the order of about 2 hours. If we have any connectivity problems, we do have a pre-recording. So if we do have problems, please bear with us while we load up the pre-recordings of the presentations. We'll start with a talk about some preliminaries and site visit safety considerations. And then John will present the LHDA presentation. Michael and myself will do the MSKC presentation. We then have 2 drone videos of the Port Hardy and Katse site areas. We will then, depending on how much time is left, have a question and answer session, and then we will close with a few reminders. You will be able to access a recording of this live event on the LSDA website shortly. Note that only the presenters are able to talk. Attendees will not, but if you want to raise any questions during the briefing, you can do that using the MS Teams question and answer function, which I think is on the right side of your Teams screen. We do have a period, as I said, for answering questions at the end of the presentation. But we will answer all questions, whether submitted separate to the meeting or submitted during the meeting itself. They will all be answered formally and sent to those that have downloaded the documents. We have arranged a site visit for the 15th and 16th of June. Those that have registered interest in attending the site meeting should have received the itinerary. If you haven't, it is available on the LHDA website. You will be required to submit an indemnity declaration, and that form is attached to the itinerary itself. So please complete that. You can either send it in advance of the site visit, or you can hand it in on the morning of the site visit. The site visit is simply to allow potential tenderers to examine the site areas and the surroundings. We won't be holding a formal question and answer session. So any questions of a commercial or a technical nature, we won't be accepting on the day. The reason for that is that the people conducting the site visit on behalf of LHDA and MSKC are not necessarily the person's best place to answer questions of this nature. So if you do have such questions, just put them in the form provided in the itinerary, and you can email them to us on the tender inquiry address, or you can hand them in during the visit itself. A few words on site visit safety considerations. Please take care when you're traveling up to the site, back from the site, and while you're up at the site themselves. You will need a 4x4 vehicle in good condition. There have been a few nasty accidents up there recently, so please take as much care as you can. Particular hazards to note: the roads can be pretty poor in certain areas. The roads are generally being improved up there, but you will still come across roads that are pretty poor. The weather can change very quickly, and poor weather conditions are common. At the moment, there have been some snow and freezing conditions up in the project area, so please remember that. And also when you're driving through populated areas. We've noted a few other safety considerations in the site itinerary itself, so please mix it and you have a read through those. There's a few examples there of the poor road conditions you may well encounter during the visit, so please drive at an appropriate speed when you are passing through these areas. For weather conditions, as I mentioned, there's already been snow and freezing conditions up there in certain areas. So please check the weather forecast and come prepared for such conditions. Accidents are common up there. You can see there on the left. Please take particular care when you're on bends. Make certain you're at the right speed and be aware of traffic coming in the opposite direction, not necessarily in the right lane either. And again, the photograph on the right, please make certain that you are driving at a speed appropriate for the weather conditions. When you're driving through populated areas, you need to be aware of pedestrians and particularly children that could well enter the road unexpectedly. So make certain you are driving through slowly. And also you need to be aware of livestock who can also enter the road suddenly. With that, I'll hand over to John for the LHDA presentation. Thank you, John.
We seem to be having some technical difficulty with John. Just stand by as we check on him. John, we can hear you now. Are you there?
Sorry, am I coming through?
We can hear you now. Fantastic. Sorry about that. You may continue. We will just wait for your screen share.
Okay, thank you. I'm having some challenges with the Sorry, am I still on air?
We can still hear you, John. We're just waiting for your presentation to come through.
Okay, I'm having IT problems. John, is it possible for you to put up the presentation, because this simply isn't functioning?
Just one moment while we get that presentation up, Jonathan.
John, just give me one moment.
Thank you very much. Once that presentation is up, we'll let you know. And then, John, obviously, if you can just direct Jonathan to navigate you through that presentation as you give it, that should be fantastic. It shouldn't take us too much longer to get that on screen.
Okay, thank you. My apologies.
Excellent, Jonathan. We've got the presentation. We can see it. It is not yet full screen, if you would like to do that. Though it is legible, so if you want to continue in that format, I'm pretty sure that'll be fine for the technical portion of this.
Okay, we're going to have to run this blind because I can't actually see what you're seeing. So if we're on, are we on the first slide at the moment, John?
I'm sure we can have Jonathan just unmute his microphone and give you a audio update as you guys navigate through it.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, everyone. I apologise for the IT hitches. I've done lots of these presentations, and this is the first time it's gone completely pear-shaped, but so my apologies for that. Okay, I'm speaking on behalf of LHDA, and if we take the LHDA, the overview slide, I'm going to give a big picture view of the project as a whole, and I'll briefly talk about the progress, about anti-corruption policy, some of the specifics for the wider project and preferential procurement, how we go about evaluating all tenders, some mention issues on environmental, community, health and safety, and then brief discussion of tender guidelines. I'm very much giving the overview, and John and Michael will go into the specifics of this particular tender. So if we can go to the second slide, please, John, which is simply a background slide. This project has been on the go for many years. So there's a
Unfortunately, it seems as if we've lost John and his audio. We'll just give him a moment to see if he can be with us. In the interim, Jonathan, just want to see if you are still with us and just verify our connection.
I'm here.
Fantastic. So we're having issues with John. Let's just let him know that there's something on the go. And then obviously, if you guys are able to manage or continue through this, that'll be fantastic. If not, we will advance to the next sections. We can see that John has fallen off the connection and off the line right now. He's probably having a connectivity issue. I'm going to give him a few moments and see if he can come back to us. In the meantime, Jonathan, if you'd like to put up any slides or anything of value to the attendees, it'll be great. We apologize for the technical issues. Please stand by whilst we see what we can do with regards to that. Please note that this is being recorded, so after the presentation and after everything has happened, if you do need to review, it will be available and accessible to everyone.
Graham, I think in John's absence and everyone, I'll have a go at John's presentation. It's not something I'm overly familiar with, but we'll see where we can go. I hope you can still see the map that's up there. John was about to say, I think that the project has been a long time in the making. The treaty was signed 24th of October 1986, the phase 2 agreement, the 11th of August 2011. I think we all know that the purpose of the project is to transfer water to Gauteng in South Africa. There's a slide there showing the government, the governance of the phase 2 project. We can see the government in Lesotho and the government of South Africa with the Lesotho Highlands Water Commission and the relationship LHDA and the Trans-Caledonian Tunnel Authority. between the two governments. Organogram of the Phase 2 project, Lesotho Highlands Water Commission. We have the LHDA board, the Phase 2 subcommittee, the project management unit of LHDA. There is also a panel of experts reporting through the project management unit to LHDA. And then we have the consultants, such as MSKC and other stakeholders, and then the contractors. Also at Water Commission is the TCTA board subcommittees. The scope of Phase 2, the water transfer. There are environmental, social and health obligations, impact studies, action plans, advanced infrastructure is underway. We have the Podihadi Dam and the transfer tunnel, which is the presentation we are giving today. Other contracts, feeder roads and bridges, livelihood restoration, and there are further feasibility studies for hydropower.
Hi, Jonathan. Sorry to interrupt. We have got John back on the line. We are just enabling his audio.
Okay. So, John, when you're able to join, we are on slide 5 of the presentation.
Thank you very much, John. I apologise, everyone. I'm sure this is irritating everyone nearly as much as it's irritating me.
We've updated everyone, John. You are welcome to continue at this stage.
Okay, thank you very much. So, briefly talking about the scope of Phase 2, John has put the slide up. Under Phase 1, you can see the two dark blue reservoirs there. Those are existing, Katsi Reservoir, Mahali Reservoir, and the tunnel system delivering water to South Africa. Under Phase 2, to the right-hand side, you can see a light blue reservoir with a red dam and Podihadi tunnel. So under Phase 2, we have a whole program to develop a very large storage reservoir, more than 2,000 million cubic meters of storage, and a tunnel slightly less than 40 kilometers long to deliver the water into Katsi and onto South Africa. Within the water transfer scope, there are environmental, social, health impact studies and action plans, advanced infrastructure, the dam itself, the transfer tunnel, which is the focus of this contract, a variety of feeder roads and bridges to make good communications which are cut by the reservoir, livelihood restoration programs. There's also a hydropower program which is still in further feasibility and subject to development. Next slide, please, John.
Yes, John.
Thank you very much. So around the future Podihadi Reservoir itself, there's a raft of infrastructure going on to be developed. Towards the lower left-hand side, you can see the arrow to where the dam will be. There are a lot of roads affected. We're building new roads at the moment, new power supply systems. So there's a 132 kilovolt power line being built. Major bridge, which is also out to tender at the moment. So there's a combination of activities under construction and about to be developed. And then the blue line to the left-hand side is the beginnings of the transfer tunnel feeding the water from the reservoir. Next slide, John. So the tunnel itself crosses underneath a pair of mountain ranges. The reservoirs are at approximately 2,000 meters altitude. The tunnel obviously is just below that, is permanently submerged, and the tops of the mountains go to over 3,000 meters. So there's around 1,000 meters of cover in places. As I mentioned, it's almost 40 kilometers long, with a variety of access tunnels and so on. Next slide, please, John. So progress so far. we started the whole process of procurement, recruiting engineering, environmental and social consultants in 2014. There's been a large amount of community interaction. We've demarcated the reservoir with a series of bollards around the reservoir. There's a large program of registering assets. We're flooding 50 square kilometers of land, so that has a major impact on people's land and properties. There are socio-economic development programs. We've had geotechnical investigations, environmental impact assessments, environmental management plans, and then the engineering design, procurement of contractors, and as I mentioned, infrastructure is currently under construction at the moment. Thank you, John. One major issue which arose during phase one was a matter of corruption, which ended up involving court cases and even jail sentences. We are extremely keen that we have no taint of corruption on phase two, and as far as I'm aware, there has been no hint of any corrupt practice anywhere within the project team or any of those associated with it, which is very good news. So there's a strong anti-corruption policy which is bound into your tender document. That's bound into every contract. We have very much a zero tolerance approach to corruption. The key issue for you now as tenderers is disclosure of any potential issues, and that's not disclosure of corruption, that's disclosure of possible conflict of interest, so that we can address it, deal with it, and make sure that it doesn't compromise your tender process. So within the tender documents, there's a declaration form. There is a detail of all of the engineering firms involved within the consultant. And what you need to do is to identify within your wider organization any interaction, either with LHDA or with those consultants, which could by anyone be construed as a relationship which might give rise to questions about conflict of interest. The reason for that is that if we know about it, we can ensure that there is no conflict of interest in the team that's doing the tender evaluation. If we don't know about it, then questions get asked at a later stage and the tender process can be challenged. So this is not to say that simply because you're working with those consultants somewhere else that disqualifies you. It's to say that if you declare it, we can address the issue and make sure it does not compromise the tender and your tender is able to go through satisfactorily. So please take it very seriously. Look at the information on conflict of interest and make sure you complete the tender returnables on that, and then we can address it and eliminate any possible questions. Thank you, John. There is a whole process spelled out in the phase two agreement relating to procurement, and there are various principles set out. So the first ones are basic good practice of competitiveness, transparency, cost effectiveness, quality. Subject to those, there's also an order of preference of, where possible, involving Lesotho, South Africa, the region represented by SADC, and then others. So giving priority to opportunities in Lesotho and in the region. There are preference margins to encourage capacity building and economic growth, and those are designed to maximize local procurement opportunities, minimize imported goods, skills and labours where practical, and to maximize skills and technology transfer. Now, particularly on something as technical as this tunnel contract, we are expecting international contractors, and we're expecting them to bring skills and skilled people, but we do require them to involve local organisations as well. So there's a strict requirement for a minimum 10% Lesotho, 30% South Africa participation in the tenderer. So that's the joint venture and the prime, the main subcontractors within that tenderer. The details are in the document, but if you don't include that participation, then you're automatically disqualifying your tender. So it is crucial that you look at that share and participation. There's a lot more detail on preference requirements in the tender documents, but this one is particularly important as it's an automatic disqualification criteria. So look at the document, read that, and if you have queries, come back to the inquiry. Thank you, John. In order to help everyone see how they fit into the structure, we've created a tiered system, which again is spelled out in the information for tenderers. And we just put labels on the different types of participation that different organizations might have in any tenderer. So tier 1 is prime contractor, joint venture partner. So those are going to be your major contractors. Tier 2 is any major subcontractor contracted to the tier 1 enterprise. So it may be that you've still got a regional significant contractor, but they don't have the financial clout to take joint and several liability, which is required in a joint venture, but they're still going to be a major part of the team. So they would be a tier 2 contractor. Within the document, and John will flesh this out a bit, there are certain niche specialist expertises where we're going to allow that expert subcontractor to be linked to more than one tender, and that's a tier 3. That's a specialist, and that's in pre-identified areas of specialization, which John will talk about. Tier 4 is a smaller subcontractor that's typically a small, medium, micro enterprise. They're contracted into the wider team, but they're not, their skills and financial capability isn't necessarily used in the evaluation. Tier 5 is a supplier. So just to reiterate, the tier 1 and 2 form the tenderer. That's the prime point of evaluation. Tier 3 is included when we're looking at the technical expertise. Look at the evaluation criteria in the document and note that your tier 1 and tier 2 contractors can only be in one tender. We have had cases where a contractor tries to appear in multiple tenders. That causes serious problems and it will lead to somebody being disqualified. So for goodness sake, check that out. Make sure that your core team, your tier 1 and tier 2, is exclusive to this tender. Thank you, John. So for each organization, and we've got a large number of people listening in on this call, there'll be even more drawing documents and looking. Not all of those are major international contractors. The thing for you to do is to look and say, where do you fit in the tier structure? What can I offer? Are you the major firm that's going to be a JV member, a main subcontractor, specialist, small, medium enterprise, or a supplier? There's many, many opportunities. If you're putting a tender together as one of the leads, there is a supplier database on our website. That's effectively a notice board which allows any organization to advertise their services. It is not a list of pre-screened and pre-recommended LHDA recommended suppliers. It's simply a notice board. It's up to you to screen anyone on there. And just to emphasize, there are no LHDA recommended suppliers. There is no organization already chosen by LHDA for any part of this project that's still out to tender. That's entirely up to you. We have had individuals approaching organizations saying, if you want the job, come to me. That's simply not true. So the list is there, the database is there. You can use it to find people who've expressed an interest, but it's simply organizations that have expressed an interest. And if you're still looking, and particularly if you're the smaller organizations looking for the big ones, all those who attend this briefing session will be on the attendance register, and we will publish details of that online. So that gives you another opportunity to see who is interested and allow you to network. But it's up to you to network and find the opportunities. Thank you, John. Thank you. We're almost there. The evaluation process, just to talk that through, It's a staged process which we apply to all of our tenders, and the details, the specifics differ from tender to tender, but the principle is the same each time. So first of all, we simply check your eligibility. There are certain things which would make you ineligible. Check the document. We look for your administrative compliance. Does your submission actually meet our requirements? Have you given us what we asked for? And then there's a points-based evaluation of the technical proposal. And for that, you need to meet all the requirements and submit the various forms in the returnable schedules. And there's a point scoring there, and you essentially have to pass the threshold to be considered further. In essence, we're not interested in awarding a contract to an organisation not capable of doing the job. So it's up to you to show through your technical proposal that you are suitable to build the project. Again, John will talk in more detail about that. Having passed the threshold, we look at the price and we look at your preference, and your scoring, your ranking is based on price and preference. So everything before that is merely a gateway to get into the race, and thereafter we're looking at price and preference. Thank you, John. So I'm not going to go into detail, but we are building a project in a remote mountainous region with some unique environmental issues, and there's a lot of environmental constraints on you, quite rightly. So you need to be aware of that and respond to that. Next one, John. You are, although it's mountainous region, it is inhabited. There's a significant population up there, and those people live from the land and from their environment they're in. So we've had extensive community engagement, and within your document, there are a whole series of documents on how to interact with the communities. So there's a communication protocol. We have a regional office up there. You need to interact with the communities in cooperation with the client. There's a land access protocol. You'll be given access to designated areas for your site. You are not free to trespass outside those. If you need more land, there's a whole process for acquiring land. It all belongs to somebody, and you're not free just to wander around at will. Your construction, some of it is near communities, so there are condition surveys on buildings before and after any activities you may have, and you need to make sure that those happen, and then any remediation measures are taken that are needed. The project offers a significant opportunity for work for a local community that is very keen to work. So we have labour recruitment desk, and a series of guidelines on how to go about recruiting local workforce.
It seems we may have lost John again. Let me just check in with Jonathan.
I'm here.
Excellent. I think John's either lost his mic or has become disconnected. I don't know if you can or would like to continue with what the last few slides.
I'll give it my best.
Excellent. I believe we ended on labour recruitment guidelines.
Yeah, as John was saying, the labour recruitment guidelines are included in the tender documents. Local hire will be through the local recruitment desk. The local communities are involved in, structures are involved in that, and the recruitment process is going to be absolutely transparent. And the same with the local service providers, the transparent procurement process. The SHEC framework standardized phase 2 activities across all contracts, compliance and monitoring. You will be expected to or required to submit a health and safety management plan, environmental management plan, and quality management plan. And we are expecting reporting to international best practice. There will be an external check auditor who will be auditing all contracts and will be reporting to the project principals. Tender guidelines. You will have seen the advertisements in the printed media and on the LHDA website. Respond to the instructions to tenderers. Make certain you read them carefully. Use the templates provided for submittals. These are the returnable schedules. I'll be touching on that in a little bit more detail as we go through the later presentation. It's a quality-based evaluation and the minimum pass is 60%. There are other requirements that I will touch on. The lowest price is not guaranteed to win. No late tenders accepted. If you don't get your tender in by the deadline, it will not be accepted. And you can keep up to date with information regarding this contract on the LHDA website there. And thank you for that. Unfortunately, John, looks like we've lost John, but we've managed to get through it. With that, we will continue with the MSKC presentation. Before I start the MSKC presentation, just a few words on the MSKC JV. Who are we? We are the Metsi Asenku Kubelo Consultants joint venture. We are responsible for the tender design and documentation, detailed tender design and documentation, detailed design and the site supervision of the construction of the Paurihari Transfer Tunnel. We have 5 main partners that you can see there. All international, but we are working through the South African offices. We have 3 sub-consultants that you can see there. This information is important because, as John mentioned, you will have to submit a declaration of any actual or potential conflict of interest in relation to MSKC. Moving on to the presentation itself, it's in 2 parts. I will go through the tender documents and procedures, and then Michael will go through the technical aspects and some associated commercial aspects. A quick overview of the tender documents. They are in 3 parts. Part 1, tender procedures, 2, works requirements, and 3, conditions of contract and contract forms. For this part of the presentation, I will focus only on part 1, tender procedures. There are 5 sections in part 1, and we will go through each of these in turn when we get there. But for the sake of completeness, there are 4 sections in part 2, works requirements, and 3 sections in part 3, conditions of contract and contract forms. You will have seen by now probably that the general conditions of contract are the 2010 edition of the FIDIC Pink Book. Tender procedures, section 1, standard instructions to tenderers. Please make certain that you are familiar with all the instructions to tenderers, particularly with reference to corrupt and fraudulent practices and eligibility. As noted by John, the 4th bullet point there, you may tender for both the tunnel and the dam contracts. Tender clarifications may be requested up to a point 14 days before the submission of the tender deadline. But we would ask that you get your clarifications in, request for clarifications as early as you possibly can. We will probably be issuing tender addenda during the tender period. Moving on to section 2, tender data sheet. As John mentioned, there are 5 tendering enterprise tiers. Tier 1, prime contractor or JV member, jointly and severally liable in that case for the execution of the contract. In the evaluation, we will be taking note of your financial capability and specific experience. And a reminder that Tier 1 enterprises can only participate in 1 tender. Tier 2, main subcontractors, you would be contracted with Tier 1 enterprise. We will be taking note of specific experience in the evaluation, but not the financial capability of Tier 2 enterprises. And Tier 2 can only participate as Tier 1 in 1 tender. Tier 3, specialist subcontractors, also contracted to the Tier 1 enterprise, but they may participate in more than 1 tender. And that is because of the specialist nature of the services they will be providing. And we have identified 3 areas there: the Cathay Lake piercing, shaft excavation, geotechnical investigation for the Cathay Lake piercing. We will be taking account of their specific experience in the evaluation, but not the financial capability. Tier 4, typically small, medium, and micro enterprises. They can be contracted to any tier enterprise. We won't be considering the financial capability or specific experience, and Tier 4 enterprises may participate in more than 1 tender. Tier 5, supply of goods. This could be a local entity providing fresh fruit for the canteens, for example. Financial capability and experience not considered, and may participate in more than 1 tender. Just a reminder there that for the purpose of the tender evaluation, the Tier 1 and Tier 2 enterprises are considered the tendering entity. Alternative tenders, not permitted. Alternative technical solutions, permitted for certain part of the works, and you can find subject to restrictions, and you can find those restrictions in ITT 12.4, but we will only evaluate an alternative technical solution of the preferred bidder if he has submitted a conforming technical offer. So note that we will only look at the alternative technical solution, if any, offered by the preferred bidder, and that will be on the back of a conforming technical offer. Tender currencies, local currency can either be the Lesotho Maloti or the South African Rand. Foreign currencies up to 3. Tender validity 180 days. Tender security will be required in the specified amount, and the original must be delivered separately to LHDA before the closing of the tenders. If it is not submitted or it is not substantially responsive to the requirements of the instructions to tenderers, the tender will be rejected without opening. So please note that. Tender submission, LHD offices in Mazero, 30th of August 2021, 1400 hours standard Lesotho time. Again, a reminder that late tenders will not be accepted. The shutters will come down in the reception area at 1400 hours. So please get your tenders in good time. We will be requiring the tender be 1 original and 2 hard copies, plus 1 electronic copy, CD, DVD, of the documents in PDF format, but we will require the bill of quantities in Excel format. Please don't forget that. The employer is considering electronic tender submissions, and if this is the case, you will be informed in due course. but if permitted, the submission will be either using the e-procurement portal, and you will see the guidelines to that in Annexure 1 of the instructions to tenderers, or CD or DVD. But you must note that in the case of electronic submission, the originals of the tender security and the letter of tender must be submitted separately before the submission deadline. Tender opening will be at LSD offices in Maseru, 30th of August at 1300 hours standard Lesotho time, 1 hour after the receipt of the tenders. If we are allowing electronic tender submission, then at the opening, the employer's representative will announce the name of the tenderer and whether a substantially responsive tender security has been submitted by the tenderer, and if so, the tender prices from the letter of tender. So that is the importance of submitting, in the case of electronic tender submission, submitting the tender guarantee, tender security, and the letter of tender in a separate envelope before the deadline. Moving on to section 3 of part 1, evaluation criteria. As you can see there, there are 6 stages. The first 3 are gates that you must go through before we will even contemplate looking at the tender price. If you don't get through stage 1, 2, 3, we won't even look at the tender price. Stage 1, determination of eligibility. That is assessed simply on a pass or a fail basis. If you don't meet the eligibility requirements, you will be the tender will be disqualified without proceeding to detailed evaluation. Any minor omissions, that we will request your clarification. And you can see the detailed requirements for eligibility in table 1 of section 3.1 there. Stage 2, evaluation of administrative compliance. Again, it's assessed on a pass or a fail basis, and failing to meet these requirements may lead to disqualification of your tender. Again, minor omissions may be addressed with a request for a clarification. You can see the minimum, detailed minimum requirements for administrative compliance in the table shown there in section 3.2. Evaluation of the technical proposal, stage 3. It will be assessed only on the tenders on your technical proposal, and this proposal must be in the formats prescribed in section 4 returnable schedules. And just a note there that to reiterate that the tenderer will comprise the tier 1 and the tier 2 enterprises. And for the technical proposal, we will look at the specific experience of tier 1, 2, and 3 enterprises, not 4 and 5. You can see there a rolled up summary of table 5 of section 3.31, 100 points available, and then you can see the points available for each criterion. To proceed to stage 4 financial evaluation, you must score a minimum of 60% overall and 40% of the score against the subtotals for the criteria identified there. So please make certain you understand that. Evaluation of the tender price, stage 4. There are 3 steps within stage 4. We will correct any arithmetical errors to arrive at the corrected tender price, and then we will make a price adjustment for any non-conformities to arrive at the evaluated tender price. The third step is the calculation of the score for the tender price, which is based on the evaluated tender price. For the tender under consideration, you can see the formula there. I'm sure you've all seen something similar before. Please note the weighting given to the financial offer is 90%. You will see in the tender documents and that the letter of tender and in Part F of the bill of quantities, we do expect that you will provide an all-exclusive price for the provision of facilities management of the Podihati village. But note that this price will not form part of the tender price for the valuation of the tenders for the transfer tunnel itself. It is simply a price for the employer to decide where to place this work, which would be either in the facilities management, which will either be in the Podihati transfer tunnel or the Podihati dam, but you are required to price it. Stage 5, evaluation of preference. The methodology is you can find in section 3.5. There's some definitions there. Please note there are no points for meeting the minimum thresholds. You have to exceed the minimum thresholds to garner the points. The preference criteria, they are either a disqualification criteria, which is self-explanatory, or a condition of award. A condition of award, you won't be disqualified immediately, but the preferred tenderer will be required to demonstrate compliance prior to the award of contract. The table you can see there is a summary of the maximum points available for each of the preference criterion and where the associated details can be found. So employment, for example, section 3.51, maximum of 30 points available. Its status is a condition of award. National participation underneath is a disqualification criteria, and the tables where you can find the detailed information. Determination of the total preference score. You can see the formula there. And you will see also that the weighting given to the preference is 10%. Calculation of the total score for a particular tender is simply the sum of the tender price and the preference scores. So if you remember, there was a weighting of 90% for the tender price and 10% for the preference score, and it is simply the sum of the two scores to determine the ranking. Moving on to section 4, returnable schedules. Please note the importance of the returnable schedules. You must ensure that they are all submitted properly to ensure the completeness of your tenders. If you don't, your tenders may be considered non-responsive. There is a checklist. Please use it. I think it has to be submitted, but it will guide you as to whether you've completed all the returnable schedules. Please provide the information in the format requested, and don't refer to separate lists, company brochures, and the like. Do not provide any information that we haven't specifically requested, because that information will simply be ignored. So please don't waste your time with that. Provide the information that we specifically request. And just a note at the bottom there that for each of the schedules, please paginate your pages. Finally, section 5, corrupt and fraudulent practices. John has noted the importance of these documents, and I've just identified them there. The Lesotho Highlands Water Project anti-corruption policy. Note and understand that. The procedure for dealing with conflict of interest. That is where you will see the acknowledgement and disclosure form that will be submitted as returnable schedule 421, and the funding agency fraud and corruption requirements. Again, please make certain you understand these documents. And with that, this concludes the first part of the MSKC presentation, and I'll now hand you over to Michael Kastner for the technical presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Hello to everybody. Sorry, I hear myself now. I think now it's okay. I'm talking about the technical aspects of the project. The first slide shows here project access. We have shown with 2 red circles the 2 main works areas, the Podihati works area and the Katse works area. And there are 3 yellow circles are the three main border posts relevant for the project. First one on top is the Caledon Sport border post, which is primarily important for the Polyharly works area. And the Vicksburg border post is of prime importance for the Katze works area. We have also given here in this slide the distances between Macedo and the two works areas, and in case you check Google Maps, you will find durations between the various key points within Lesotho, and these durations are fairly accurate. So to some extent, you can definitely rely on that. So at the beginning of the project, of course, we have to have a look at the facilities. Those are provided in detail in the specifications chapter 2. First of all, the facilities to be provided by the employer or others. We have here bulk power, which will be supplied to substations. Communication, which we also have designated locations for. Then land for the site offices at the works areas and land for the labor camps. Then we have limited constructed accommodation for the employer and the engineer. And then there is land available for the accommodation, which has to be set up for the employer, the engineer, and the contractor. Then we have facilities that are to be provided by the contractor for the employer and the engineer. Initially, we are going to have interim facilities. These are site offices and residential accommodation. These will then be replaced by long-term facilities as soon as those are finished, both the site offices as well as the residential accommodation. And in addition to that, contractor also has to provide the water supply, sewer and sewer treatment, electrical power reticulation, internet connection, security, and of course the maintenance of these facilities. Then we of course have also the facilities the contractor has to provide for the works, and these facilities are very much typical for a project of this nature and magnitude. This includes site access roads, a management camp, labor camp, and site offices, bulk power and electrical reticulation from the substations which we are providing, as well as lighting and water supply, communication, of course. Then the contractor has to set up his concrete batching facilities and the segment factories, and we have associated laboratories. We will also have medical facilities on site, explosives magazines, and for the tunnels and underground works, we need tunnel services, and these facilities, of course, also require operation and maintenance throughout the entire duration of the project. In addition to that, what John mentioned already in his presentation before, we have facilities management of the Polyharly Permanent Village. This is described in chapter 2 of the specifications, and it has to be decided later on after the tender is submitted whether these works are going to be provided to the, are contracted to the Polyharly tunnel contractor or to the Polyharly dam contractor. And these, the operation and maintenance of these facilities includes permanent housing, primary school, recreation center, gatehouse, operation and maintenance, operations and visitor center, and a commercial center. And as stated here also in brackets, the village itself will be provided by others. So that what is going to be your task is only the operation and maintenance of these facilities. We also had a look at the aggregates required for the works. We identified two main quarries, one on the Polyharly side, which is the Tlokoeng West quarry, located in close proximity to the works area, means the area where we are we have foreseen the batching plant and segment factory to be set up. And on the Katze area, we have the existing northern access road quarry, and this is going to be extended. The northern access road quarry is the location where those who are going to attend the site visit will meet on the 15th of June. In addition to that, we have identified borrow areas in the tender documents. These are typically along the access roads. The contractor is of course also free to come up with his own quarries and borrow areas, and those have to be approved by the employer. In addition to that, the contractor can of course also rely on commercial sources, but please be informed that in the highlands such commercial sources are very limited or non-existent. We have in our tender documents included a high-level construction schedule in section 6 of the tender documents. The overall construction period is about 65 months. We have also set 2 milestones. Milestone 1 is after about 31 months, and this requires the completion of essential work items for the impoundment of the Polyhali reservoir. These are in particular the upper and lower intake structures, the upper and lower intake tunnels, and the Polyhali gate shaft, complete with fully commissioned stop blocks. The second milestone is on the Katze side. For that we have foreseen a duration of 39 months, and this requires an excavation of the Katze outlet tunnel up to 400 meters from the Katze gate shaft. And the Katze gate shaft itself has to be completed with fully commissioned stop blocks. Reason for that is that we want to have as much time as possible available for the crucial component of the project, which is the breakthrough in the existing Katze reservoir. Now let's have a look into the various underground spaces. Shown here are the edits. We have 3 different edits to the Polyhali transfer tunnel. All of them have a gradient of approximately 8%. They have a length between 900 and 1700 meters. And please note that the cross section and the intersection point with the Polyhali transfer tunnel can be adjusted up to your requirements. And these edits are not going to receive final concrete lining. Now the waterway tunnels, all of them are going to have a 4.5 meter internal diameter. First of all, about the drill and blast waterway tunnels. All of them will receive a 300 millimeter cast in situ unreinforced concrete lining. Apart from the last one here in our list, the Katze outlet tunnel, which will receive a 500 millimeter cast in situ reinforced concrete lining. The reason for that is that the area between the Katze gate shaft and the final breakthrough point, so the lake tap, will not be accessible ever again once the final blast is taken. So we have to make sure that this is a permanent solution. The TBM waterway tunnel has also a 4.5 meter internal diameter. It's a good 34 kilometers long. Will be lined by 250 millimeter steel reinforced and gasketed precast concrete tunnel lining. And this is a single pass lining. It will be backfilled with a 2-component grout right through the tail shield of the respective TBM. And please also note that peak gravel and grouting of the annulus through the segments is not allowed. So please do not waste your time coming up with a proposal of peak gravel and grouting through the segments. It will not be considered. Important for our TBM drive is that we have foreseen 2 new and strong shielded hard rock TBMs. Whether they are single or double shield TBMs is up to the tenderers. Important to notice also that we have foreseen probe drilling of a minimum length of 120 meters up to 200 meters capability, and each of these probe holes has to be surveyed with an acoustic or optical televiewer. And we are going to have overlapping probe drills with 40-meter minimum overlap, so the entire length of the TBM tunnel will be probe drilled. Also note that underground TBM assembly and launching chambers, if required by you, are to be designed by the contractor, and for that a fixed charge and a fixed time has to be foreseen. If we have at first a look at the intake area, we have here on the lower left side the intake structures, and these lead into the lower and upper intake tunnel. These two tunnels meet at the Katze gate, at the Polyhardy gate shaft, and on top of the Katze gate shaft, which is open to the surface, we have a Polyhardy. On top of the Polyhardy gate shaft, we have the Polyhardy gatehouse. About the two shafts, one at the Polyhardy and one at Katze, we have foreseen both being excavated by the raise boring method, followed by slashing from the top down. The shafts are a good 100 meters deep. Please note that the Polyhardy shaft is open to the surface and the Katze shaft has an edit, so it's not open to the surface. Both shafts have a final diameter of 10 meters and are designed to have a 600 millimeter cast in situ reinforced concrete lining. Then, as mentioned already before, the lake tap and rock trap are the most crucial component of our project. They are not typical to underground projects, so therefore we want to see method statement for the excavation and the support. And we definitely want to see a specialist subcontractor for these works, a firm having experience with such works and also individuals having experience with such works. And the entire lake tap area and rock trap area is going to be reinforced with a cast in situ reinforced concrete lining. About the intersections between the Polyhardy transfer tunnel and the edits, we have given an indicative junction alignment in our tender documents. The contractor is free to optimize the angle, radius, and dimensions. If you divert from that what is given in the tender documents, you as the tenderer should come up, or as the contractor finally, you have to come up with the temporary support and the final design of it, final lining design, in case you deviate from the tender design. And also, if you are coming up with a TBM assembly chamber underground or any other widenings required by the contractor for the TBM and other operations, those are to be designed by you and are to be completely backfilled with concrete and grouted. The project is located through its entire length in Lesotho basalt and will be intersected by a series of lineaments which are subvertical. The water inflow is expected along these lineaments. Details are given in the GBR. The horizontal basalt flows are foreseen to be fairly tight, and therefore it is unlikely that we have any or very much water inflow, so it's primarily at the lineaments. We have made a forecast of the groundwater inflow, and based on that, the contractor shall propose a system to avoid flooding of the tunnel drives, in particular of the TBM drives, to a minimum capacity of 160 liters per tunnel heading. Since the lake tap is crucial to the project, we have foreseen also an additional site investigation by coming up with 8 additional boreholes. They are listed in the top right corner. 3 of the boreholes are foreseen to be parallel to the lakeshore, and 5 of them are in the immediate vicinity of the lake tap. The setup is definitely a special one, since it is going to be from barges, and you have therefore to go through water and then drill into rock of various depths. The ones close to the rock, to the lake shore, 85 meters into rock, and the other ones in the lake tap area between 20 and 50 meters into rock. Now let's have a look into how we structured our BOQ and the payment of the works you are going to execute. We have at first fixed charges, time-related charges, and provisional sums, which are described in detail in the chapter 1 of the specifications. And then we have quantity proportionate charges, which for the underground works are especially in specifications chapter 10, 13, 14, and 26, amongst others, but these ones are the most relevant ones. So our BOQ is then structured in a particular way. We have various works areas, works area G1, G2, and G3. G1 is the overall project, G2 is the Polyharley works area, and G3 is the Katze works area. In addition, as mentioned before, we have in our BOQ then a provisional sums, which are shown in part Y of the BOQ. For quantity proportionate charges, we have in our BOQ the parts C, V, and W for civil and electromechanical parts. Now let's have a look into the cost components of the underground works. We have here fixed charges and time-related charges. These fixed charges and time-related charges should primarily include personnel and equipment, and also consumables, which are time-related. For example, in the underground works, the ventilation, lighting, and pumping. And to some extent also temporary works like scaffolding. In the quantity proportionate charges, we only want to see material. And of course then consumables, which are directly related to the material. If we now have a look into an example, which is the breakdown of the TBM tunnel excavation into different types of charges. We have here the time axis and here the distance axis. On the time axis, we have the fixed charges and time-related charges. And here, for example, on the TBM assembly chamber, you know how much time it's going to require you to set up the TBM assembly chamber, whereas the actual TBM drive has then ground conditions which are not 100% known, and therefore they may vary, and therefore we have then potentially changes to the time-related charges. Once the tunnel is broken through, the TBM is disassembled, the tunnel is cleaned, and then the TBM assembly chamber is then backfilled. And for this, you have to give us your fixed time and a fixed charge. Along the actual tunnel drive, we then have the quantity proportionate charges, and this is, for example, for the drill and blast tunnel, the rock support, the rock bolts, wire mesh, and so on. Now let's have a look into details of the payment method for the drill and blast tunnel. This is given in chapter 1 of the specifications. Details are shown in the specifications chapter 11193, and this is based on the Austrian standard B2203-1. We very much encourage you getting a copy of this Austrian standard and familiarizing yourself with that. It is an agreed and equitable method for determining the compensation due to the contractor for changes in rock support within the defined tunneling classes, and also for conditions outside the defined tunneling classes, both in terms of time and money. And the contractor's committed advance and unit rates will be used to determine revised advance and unit rates for conditions outside the defined tunneling classes. Now let's have a look how this works. We have in our returnable schedules, which is section 4 of the tender document, these tables, which are for the advance rate and for the unit rate of different tunnels. You have to these are already filled in. Of course, the ones in the returnable schedules are blank. You have to provide us with your advance rates over here and with your unit rates down here. We have populated that already with an assumption we made. Now we have here various tunneling classes, and they are depending on the round length. Round length is given over here, so rounds up to 1.3 meter, up to 1.7, and so on, and have a bandwidth of support rating. So this is the bandwidth. So one tunneling class is one such box over here. An example of how to do this calculation and how to come up with that what I'm explaining over here is given in this Austrian standard which I mentioned before. We have shown here the metrics for the rock support classes which we have defined in our tender documents. So this support for this support class over here, we have a drawing in our tender documents, same as for this one and all the others. If we now change in this support class, install the rock support, for example, by adding a rock bolt, we would come from the center of this box, which is over here, a little bit over here. So we add some rock support. It's still going to be within this field, and therefore you still get paid, you still are committed to the same advance rate, and you get paid the unit rate, which is listed over here. Whereas if we are taking, for example, the second box over here, a round length up to 4 meters, and we had originally foreseen to install the rock support like that, but then we agreed on installing one more layer of wire mesh. It shows that this would now fall outside the predefined box. Now our method described in the tender documents would show how this additional box is established, how large this box is, and we also have prescribed that by linear extrapolation from here over here, you would get a new advance rate. So there are no discussions about changes in advance rates due to changed rock support. We automatically create such fields over here, one field, probably even a second one. And we may do the same over here. For round length up to 3 meters, we do the same for round length up to 2.2 meters. Also may add a field over here. We may also, for round length up to 1.7 meters, add a field over here if we actually have less rock support. In addition to the tunneling classes, we have then also water complication classes. This water complication applies to water inflow, excessive water inflow in the face area, which is defined as 25 meters from the tunnel face. And we have given in our returnable schedules a matrix for water complication depending on the amount of water and the severity of the water inflow, in which way it hampers the advance works. And based on that, the foreseen advance rates in the tunneling classes are then reduced by a certain factor, which is defined in this returnable schedule then by you. Furthermore, we may have tunnel interruptions and temporary suspensions, also mentioned in the same specification chapter. The tunnel interruptions are times during which the works are carried out in the face working area, but not excavation. For example, for probe drilling, fissure grouting, treatment of overbreak. And temporary suspension is then something that is instructed by the engineer. In both cases, you would get the time as per actual. Now let's have a look at the payment method for the TBM tunnel. This is defined in the next subchapter of the specifications in 11194. And also that is an agreed and equitable method for compensating the contractor for ground conditions within the defined penetration classes, which are called regular advance, and also for conditions outside the defined penetration classes, which is called then hindered advance. So for the regular advance, we have in the returnable schedules this table. We have 8 different penetration classes depending on the penetration in millimeters per revolution of cutter head. And we have assumed a certain baseline length for each of the penetration classes. What you have now to come up with is populate this table by telling us your committed advance rate for these various penetration classes in meters per day, and then a division of the baseline length through the committed advance rates gives you then the duration of each penetration class, the total duration, and adding up everything will then finally lead to the total duration required for excavating the whole TBM tunnel. So what are then the committed advance rates? At the end, you have in this to include everything what is in your sphere of responsibility. And this includes, amongst others, the support installation, which is the segment lining and the annulus grout, the waiting time, daily and weekly stoppages for maintenance, which are also compulsory, stoppages due to TPM, backup or logistic difficulties, forward probing up to 200 meter length with 40 meter overlap, and the acoustic and optical telepheo survey, regular drilling and grouting, which has to be completed within 2 kilometers from the end of the backup, and any non-advanced activities which are within your sphere. So at the end, you have to determine what will be your TVM utilization factor, and this you have to tell us then by coming up with the right values of your committed advance rates. The TBM time-related charges payment mechanism is machine performance based. For that, we have established the so-called torque factor, which is given in the specification chapter 11194. So please read that carefully to understand how we are basing the regular advance. Using this machine performance-based method means that we are using machine data instead of very infrequent lab and field test data. And therefore, because we're using the machine performance data, tunnel geological conditions like mixed base conditions and so on are not directly connected to the payment of the time-related charges. And subjective methods like phase mapping are also not used as a classification tool. The advantage is that we can come up with penetration classes for every stroke. Since we get data every couple of seconds, so we evaluate every stroke. And this allows us to come up with a clear separation between regular and hindered advance. So once again, about the regular advance, the payment for regular advance is based on the penetration classes, which we discussed before. And this is based on a torque factor that has to be between 0.65 and 1.2. And the torque factor within this range is typically characterized by all cutters being in contact with the face, that the tunnel face is stable, that we have neither rupturing of the face due to jointing nor any changes of the strength of the rock so like varying ground conditions at the face. And only that we typically have minor breakouts in the range of maximum a couple of cubic decimeters. Now, regarding a regular and hindered advance, we have here come up with an example of the torque factor evaluation. This we have done for the Mohali tunnel, which was built in Lesotho many years ago, but we have the TBM data of that time, and we did the evaluation of these data. And it shows us that, we have done that what we show here is over a length of 6 kilometers, every single stroke. So every such line is one single stroke. And over here we came up with the torque factor. And as long as we are between 0.65 and 1.2, we are in the regular advance. And everything outside of that is hindered advance. So whether it's below or above. And as you can see, there are not too many strokes which are considered as hindered advance. We had a look then at the geological documentation, and we found that, for example, over here and over here, there were problems of the rock mass. It was a lineament, or in both cases were lineaments, and there were some difficulties, and for that reason the torque factor fell below this threshold value of 0.65. Hindered advance, as already outlined in this previous graph, is now everything what is outside the regular advance. Therefore, if the torque factor is below 0.65 or above 1.2, below 0.65 is typically because of high shield friction. This means that we have loose material resting on the shield. And above 1.2 is typically that we have blocky material, that we have instability at the tunnel face. So the hindered advance is the result of the reduction of the performance parameters of the TBM, or reduced degree of utilization of the TBM as a result of an increased inspection, maintenance and repair caused by the behavior of the tunnel face, crown and sidewalls. The application of additional or special measures which are not foreseen in the regular excavation process, excavation and support process, are also will also result in hindered advance. And stoppages not in the contractor's sphere and approved by the engineer are also to be considered as hindered advance, for which you're going to get time approved as per actual. Now for this project, we have identified a reference TBM. This is detailed in the same chapter 111.9.4 of the specifications. So in order to obtain comparable tenders, the essential TBM parameters, which are listed below and which influence the penetration, are given below. These three parameters define the reference TBM. And these parameters are not the minimum requirements of the TBM, apart from the disc cutter diameter. This is a minimum requirement. We do not want to see 17-inch cutters. But these are key parameters of the boring system, which according to forecasting models have a significant influence on the penetration. Now the actual TBM, for which we have an example given in the specifications chapter 111.9.4H. You may have a look at that. The contractor has to provide and propose his actual TBM, and the parameters of the actual TBM may differ from the reference TBM. So once again, the reference TBM is used primarily to compare between the various tenders. So after the award and the final definition of the actual TBM to be used, the reference TBM is compared to the actual TBM, and we come up with a correlation factor as given below here. And this purely depends on these three parameters. The disc diameter is one of them. Then we calculate the cutter head thrust simply by multiplying the thrust per cutter or the force per cutter with the number of discs we are using. In this particular example, we said we assume that P80 is 13,000 kilonewton. Now we have done an example down here that we come up with 4 hypothetic strokes of 1.7 meters each. The average pressure force is given over here. And we got then penetration rates of so and so many millimeters. In this particular case, for example, in the first stroke, we got 6.6 millimeters. This falls within the penetration class of 5.5 to 7 millimeters, which is the penetration class 4. However, the correlation and correction factors, which I mentioned before, based on the fact that your actual TPM may differ from the reference TPM, as well as the difference in theoretical thrust and that what you actually thrusting forward with, would have resulted in a higher penetration rate. And this penetration rate would fall within the 7 to 9 millimeter penetration class, which is penetration class 3. So that what you are actually going to be paid for are these penetration classes over here, and not that what you actually achieved. So with these explanations, I'm coming to the end of the technical presentation. Now we have 2 videos of the Polyhali works area and the Katze works area. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Michael. Just move on with the MSKC presentation. Excuse me. Seem to be having 1 or 2 issues here. Okay, we are good to continue. We'll now move on to the question and answers. We've had a few questions relating to the actual presentation and will it be saved and registered. As I mentioned earlier, it will be available on the LHDA website and you can access it there. There were also a few questions about whether the meeting has started or not, and people not being able to see the presentation. Again, if that is the case and you weren't able to see it, we have had a few technical issues, as you know, but the presentation will be available on the website. We've had a question, can you please provide information regarding the allocated budget of the project? That is not something we anticipate. I don't know whether John has another comment on that, and it isn't necessary for you to prepare your tenders. Do foreign companies need a kind of local registration or local certificate license to be able to participate in the tender? The answer is no. But we will check that and respond to that if that is the case. But I am not aware of any requirement to be able to participate in the tender. There are obviously certain registration requirements post tender award, but not to participate in the tender. Another question, shall a nominated subcontractor be a tier 2 or a tier 3 contractor, or can be both? The answer is can be both, but we haven't specified any nominated subcontractors. And if a nominated contractor should be instructed as part of a variation, then that is post-contract and not an issue of tender entity. Could you please clarify if a foreign company could participate in the tender as a sole tenderer without the local partner? The answer to that is yes. How the tenderer manages their own risk is a matter for the tenderer. However, you should note, if that's the way you will go, that you have to meet the preference requirements for national participation. So in theory, there's nothing stopping you tendering on your own, but you need to comply with the minimum preference requirements.
John, could I just jump in there?
Yeah.
Unless an organisation happens to be registered in Lesotho and registered in South Africa and be a foreign organisation, you're going to be disqualified. As we spelt out at the beginning, there are minimum participation requirements within the tenderer. So it's not just people, it's as an organisation, and there are definitions of what constitutes a Lesotho organisation and a South African organisation. You must be teamed with local organisations and you must meet those preference criteria. So although we don't explicitly bar any foreign firm from tendering alone, in reality, I can't see how they can meet those criteria. So that is a fundamental. We said it during the presentation and I'm just re-emphasising it now. So you do need local participation. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. May we utilize a USB instead of a CD? The answer to that is no, they are less secure, so please provide your tender, the copy of the tender on a CD or DVD as requested. Where will the list of possible contractors, subcontractor services be available for companies to provide their details to all parties? I think John dealt with that in his presentation. There are lists on the LSTA website, and the attendance to this meeting will be published on the LSTA website also. So I trust that answers your question. We have another question. Are those accommodations, site camp, etc., are shown as an indication? No, they are, to the best of my knowledge, firm locations and not an indication. But again, we will check that, and as I said earlier, all questions will be responded to formally. So we will answer each in turn. Do we need to identify our own site camp, site labour offices? The answer to that is those areas have already been specified, and you will use those. Who will be taking the lead as consultant? As there are 5 consultants involved, that is not a matter for the tenderers and doesn't affect how you present your tender. What is the allocated budget? We answered that previously. That is not something that is going to be announced and doesn't affect how you should put your tender together. whether there's a question here. Let me try and understand it. Whether the Michael, can you see that?
Whether the PQ criteria of 15-kilometer tunnel is to be for one project only. Yes, it is for one project only.
Somebody has noted that in the tender document section 6, it is shown in the index the presence of an indicative construction program. We were not able to find the program in section 6, neither in other sections. Could you kindly provide the missing document in the LHDA procurement portal? I don't know what's happened there. It should be there. If it is not, we will put it up immediately. I understand that organisation chart shall be provided by each company before forming a JV consortium. Is that correct? I think we have requested this information be provided with your tender. I'm not sure it's a requirement before forming a JV consortium. Will LHDA assist with work permits for non-resident personnel? They will, but it's it will be the contractor's responsibility for getting the work permits submitted and approved. LHDA will assist to the fullest extent possible, as they have done with previous work permits. But it nevertheless is the contractor's responsibility.
John,
is
can
the
I
site
quickly check in?
Yeah.
I had a look at the tender documents regarding the indicative construction program. Yes, this is correct. It is apparently not included. There's a mistake, of course, from our side, and we will rectify this as soon as possible.
Okay, we will get that sorted out today as soon as we finish the meeting. So please have a look at the website. Is a site visit compulsory? It is not. Another question was, when is the site visit? As we stated earlier, it's the 15th and 16th of June. Do non-resident Lesotho personnel need residence permits? They do. Is project funded already secured? Can the source of the funds be shared? That's not a matter for the tenderers, but whether John wants to make any comment on that particular question.
Thank you, John. So the funding for the project is arranged through Trans-Caledon Tunnel Authority, which is an organisation within the government of South Africa. They have already this project has been running for a long time and is in the process of developing. They have lined up a very significant proportion of the total funding required, and it's an ongoing process. So at any given point, there is ample funding to any commitment they make. So at the point that they make a particular commitment, they ensure that there is ample funding locked in for that. They source the money through a variety of sources, including international development banks. So the funding is underwritten by the government of South Africa. So that's the context. Right now, no one is sitting on a pile of cash for every commitment for the next however many years to build the entire project, but a very substantial proportion of that is already committed. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you, John. Just to get back to the question on, do non-resident Lesotho personnel need a residence permit? I said you do. From our own experience, once you've got your work permit, getting the residence permit is another step, but we haven't encountered any problems with that. Can a Lesotho company participate in this tender when they were involved in the previous LHDA project? Unless there are any restrictions related to debarment, then yes, they can. Is there a specific percentage local ownership required, e.g. JV of 50% local and 50% foreign? Is there a specific percentage local ownership, e.g. 50% local, 50% foreign? The answer to that, as far as I know, is no, but if anybody knows differently on the MSKC team or John, please say.
Again, there are definitions given in the document of what constitutes a Lesotho registered organisation and what constitutes a South African registered organisation, and the tenderer, the joint venture plus, so tier 1 plus tier 2 must meet the participation requirements. So I'm not quite sure whether the question is relating to individual organisations or the team, but it's very, very clear that the team must involve participation at the different levels. And then to be considered a Lesotho organisation, refer to the details given in the information for tenderers, but there are specific requirements there as to what constitutes a Lesotho organisation. It's not sufficient simply to go and register an entity tomorrow and consider yourself a Lesotho organisation. So you have to look at that, and in effect, it's an established Lesotho entity. So those definitions are given in the document, in the instructions to tenderers. Thank you, John.
Can the list of international companies interested in the project be shared so as to seek for potential JVs? As I mentioned earlier, the list of attendees will be posted on the LHDA website, so you can do your networking accordingly. Will previous tender not awarded to date, i.e. Poriari Village and Operational Centre, delay the tunnel project? The answer is, to the best of my knowledge, no. John may wish to add some comments to that.
John's quite right. The infrastructure in general facilitates the main works, but nothing that is being built now is going to delay the process of awarding the main works contracts.
Thank you, John. When is the submission date for the tender? 30th of August. As noted in the presentation, deadline 1400 hours standard Lesotho time. Other than tunnelling as specialist work, any other work shall be considered specialist work in Tier 3. We've identified where those specialisms are. It is not just tunnelling, it was the drilling for the Porihari Lake Tap investigation and shaft sinking.
And the lake tap itself.
And the lake tap itself, yes. Is any blasting work involved? Yes. The tunnel is mainly TBM, the waterway, but there are drill and blast sections of the waterway, and all the drill and blast, the access adit, we anticipate will all be drill and blast work. So yes, there will be drill and blast work involved. How do we get the meeting recording? It's on the LHDA website. The indicative program was missing. Yes, that will be uploaded. Under which occupational health and safety regulation the project will fall? There are requirements to meet LHDA safety legislation regulation and also South African regulations.
Could I just add there, the legal framework is obviously the law of Lesotho. This is a job in Lesotho. So the legal framework is the relevant legislation from Lesotho. The specifications include extensive health and safety specifications, which are your contractual obligations, and these draw on South African regulations. South Africa's got a very strong mining industry, so that's used as a regional reference point. And so the South African regulations are referred to in effect as the regional best practice. But the law that you're working under is actually the law of Lesotho. So you've got a composite of all that for the health and safety. Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. It's a question for a drill and blast project with current pandemic situation. The tender timeline is too short. Request to provide realistic timelines of 4 months so that we can seek approvals internally. The dates for the tender have already been stated. There may be tender extensions, but at the moment we will be holding you to the deadline stated in the tender documents, which is the 30th of August. That really concludes the question and answer session. As I said earlier, all questions will be responded to formally, whether raised in this meeting itself or whether submitted separately. I'm just going to close with a few reminders for you. Any late questions coming in will be answered, but the recording of this event is going to be available on the LHDA website, so please access that. There was some shaking in the drone videos. That's probably a connectivity problem. That isn't the case with the versions, the videos that are on the website, so you won't see that on the website. A reminder that the date for tender clarifications no later than 14 days prior to the tender submission deadline, which at the moment is the 16th of August 2021. The site visit 15th and 16th of June. Please familiarize yourself with the itinerary. If you don't have the itinerary, you can either email the tender inquiry address or you can access it on the LHDA website. Note that the meeting point on day one is the Katsi area quarry and not Mazero, which was the first item on the itinerary. The closing date and time for submission of tenders, 30th of August 2021, 1400 hours standard Lesotho time, and opening 1500 hours Lesotho time. With that, I will close this pre-tender meeting for the Podihadi Transfer Tunnel. And on behalf of LHDA and MSKC, I would like to thank you all for your attendance, and we look forward to receiving your tenders. Thank you.